Well, to talk more broadly about the state of retail now, I'm joined by Joshua Williams, live from New York. He's an assistant professor at Parsons, the New School. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So as we know, fashion is being dragged into politics amid the ongoing trade spat between the world's two biggest economies, the US and China. What sort of conversations are designers and retailers having about how this is all affecting them?
You know, at first I think people were hoping that this would sort of blow over, but I think we're starting to realize that this is becoming business as usual, that this is something that we have to consider. You know, when you're planning for fashion and rolling things out, you're planning many times, 6 to 12 to 20 months out in advance. And so, companies right now are really having to think about what these tariffs are going to have to do with their business a year from now.
So other than the influence, obviously, that tariffs are having, let's talk more broadly about retail and the fashion industry. What are the top trends that really are shaping consumer behavior, and which sort of companies are thriving as a result?
You know, companies that are really focused on having a one-on-one relationship with their customers are those that are winning. And that can mean brands, retail brands like Macy's, who have really implemented new technologies, omni-channel approaches to be able to do that. But we're also looking at smaller companies who are really engaging, in some cases, with one or two or three products. Brands like Casper, for example, who sell basically one product, but they figured out how to do that and do it very well and really engage, again, one-on-one with the customer.
And for companies that haven't really figured it out, which are some of the ones that are struggling the most amid some of these changing consumer patterns?
You know, a lot of the department stores in America, the large ones have figured it out, but I think some of the smaller ones are still trying to figure out where to spend money, frankly, in terms of their internal systems. For example, e-commerce was always very much a part of the marketing departments at corporations, and we're realizing now that they're really part of the retail function of a business. And so that, while that might make sense philosophically, to change that internally and really think about that systemically can cost a lot of money, and I think a lot of these companies just don't have time or money to make these changes quick enough.
And it's interesting because in its 2019 retail outlook, Deloitte called 2019 a year of disruption, and so the consumers are becoming more powerful with these expectations of really having it all. Where do you see the biggest pressures that retailers are contending with?
Well, there's more competition than ever, and that's certainly coming from digital. You can go on at any time, 24/7, 365 days a week, and shop. And not only that, but the world is flat in the sense that you can shop any brand. And I think also there was a time where retailers in particular, I'm thinking of brands like Nordstrom, that were very famous for the service that they provided, and they still are. But the fact remains that customers can go anywhere, and they are on the hunt for the cheapest possible product available. So we're really looking at consumers who are interested in the brand rather than the retail brand, if that makes sense.
And with the internet essentially flattening out the playing field, talk about some of these more well-established fashion capitals of the world. How are they faring in 2019?
You know, in many ways, I would say, Paris, New York, London, Milan are still sort of considered the fashion capitals of the world, and they're certainly driving trends. But the reality is that the customer base is really expanding. In large part in China, we're seeing such growth in terms of customer interest in fashion, customer purchases. So while Paris, for example, is still driving the overall trends, I think that fashion companies are really, boots on the ground in China, trying to figure out exactly what customers want in the future and frankly, right now.
And what are some of the other newer or up-and-coming fashion capitals that we really should have on our radar?
You know, I think a lot of people are looking towards Seoul, Korea, certainly with the K-pop phenomenon that's happening. There's a major interest in what's driving fashion there, and I think in large part that's being driven by a very different idea of what gender can be. We're seeing that in terms of the tours that are happening here in the United States and the pure mania that's happening with teenagers. And so I think, American retailers, European retailers are having to take note, particularly of a place like Seoul, Korea, which has been always a very good market, but not necessarily one driving trend.
Now, as we look at trends, we know that there's less foot traffic in some of these brick and mortar stores. So you would assume that shoplifting wasn't as big of an issue. But according to facial recognition firm Face First, in the US, 1 in 11 people that walk into a store, that's about 27 million, shoplift. And that's costing the US retail industry more than $45 billion every year. How are retailers addressing this issue, especially given the slimmer margins?
Exactly, and as the more and more that the margins become slim, the more that products become commodities in a sense. And I think that there's this idea that things don't have the value that they used to. Technology is certainly a way to combat this, and I think there's a lot of companies that are emerging. We're seeing technologies around face recognition that can recognize those that perhaps have shoplifted in the past. There are also technologies that are using RFID that help to track products within the store. So hopefully that they're not taken out of the store. I think the reality is there's not a one-size-fits-all, and companies are having to try different solutions and find the right mix for them for their company.
All right, thank you, Joshua Williams there, Assistant Professor at Parsons, the New School.